Okay, hi. My name is Dorothy Drew. I started in RTT in 2016 when I had um, a woman who helped my son, and my son has epilepsy, so she would only work with my son if I stayed in the room with him, which I probably would have done anyway. But seeing how effective it was for him, that just thrilled me about RTT, and so I went into RTT. My background is in biology, and I was a research librarian for my career, and I wanted to specialize in physical issues. So I thought, well, I'll just do the online course and that'll be enough. And then I found that and it I mean, back then that they would have you start taking the course and they'd say, go out and find people to practice on. So within the first few weeks or so, um, Marissa had a session where she did a healing vortex, and I was listening to the healing vortex for myself, like every night for several weeks, and then I just learned. I made myself learn the induction and learn um, the healing vortex kind of thing, and then of course people here in Ontario anyway, they think of vortex and they're afraid of tornadoes. So then I saw a master class where they talked about a healing pool, and I just thought that's perfect. So I would stop people everywhere. I'd be on the bus and somebody beside me would say, "Oh, I've got this really sore leg." I said, "Oh, let me help you." And I would just do anyone who would sit still for me, I would do healing vortex, with the that with the request that they just give me some feedback at the end. And then at one point, I was helping a friend who lived in a geared for income apartment, and most of the people in those apartments have a lot of issues. And so I'd go there and once a week for about 2 months, and I would just do she'd drag people in off the hallway and I'd do healing vortex on them. So I got lots and lots of experience doing that, and I loved it. And then, of course, it came out that a lot of people who have terrible physical issues have had sexual abuse at some point in their life, almost all the women and many of the men. And I thought, I'm not prepared for this. So then I decided to actually go and take the Marissa course live. I went to London, England, because I figured from where I live in London, Ontario, it was actually cheaper to fly to London, England than it was to fly to California, where the next live course was. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time in England. And I had put in one of the files in the RTT online where they have like people, I provided some stuff about Canadian income tax. I don't know if it's still up there or not, but what I found was if you've and you've been involved with businesses, so you probably already know this, but it was all new to me that if you make an incorporated company, then you can carry the expenses over. So it took me about 2.5 years to earn enough to pay off the cost of taking RTT, the cost of going to England, the cost of memberships and all that kind of stuff. And if I just done it on the income tax, I think only the first year could have had those kinds of expenses. I didn't earn much that first year. So that's sort of how I got into it. And so about for 5 years or so, all I did was RTT. And then I started to learn some other methods. I took a course on um, working with it with multiple sclerosis with a woman who specializes in that. And I was going to go through and train for it, but then I I just found it very, very draining for me when I worked with people with that kind of an illness. So I never actually completed the registration, but I did take the training. And then I took other kinds of teachers and modalities, and then I took the ones in cancer. And I had already been doing cancer. And so I tend to specialize now in cancer. And this course I was going to just demonstrate today was Barry, and it's not really hypnosis, but it's a very powerful technique because what they find with allergies is the mind plays a lot of tricks on you, and like even as Marissa said, the brain doesn't recognize adjectives. So if you say like I want to not no pain or not pain, it doesn't the brain doesn't think of that word not, it hears the word pain. So we have to, the brain does funny things. So anyway, this technique about allergies was taught because there's a part of the body, the immune system, that needs to be there for viruses and pathogens and those kinds of problems. But allergens are not the same as viruses, and your body is not supposed to have the reactions of like hay fever and all that kind of stuff. Um, if you have allergens, it should affect the nose, but not your whole body, kind of thing. And so, but what happens? This is his theory anyway. And it makes sense. Um, if you're exposed to these pathogens, these pollen, grass pollen, various kinds of things like that, uh, your body reacts, but the brain is thinking, why is this? And so you might, what he suggests is that often the spring allergies are people being afraid of exams. September allergies are people being afraid of going back to school. But that's too abstract for the brain to comprehend. But the brain can comprehend, okay, this, the person's really afraid. Why? So, but the brain can say, oh, here's ragweed pollen, here's milkweed pollen, here's this kind of grass pollen, tree pollen. That's something concrete. And the brain can say, okay, this must be why the person's afraid. And since the person's afraid of this pollen, I'm going to launch a full-scale attack on it. So then the immune system gets involved, which it shouldn't be getting involved, but once that happens, then the body will always react, even when there's no exams, even when you're not at school. And so the technique is to try and get the brain to let go of this connection of the tree pollen with fear. Uh, and that's sort of, I don't know, the 10-second description of why. So I found when I was working with a lot of clients for this, it was a great technique where I would just put it up. I put a Facebook ad saying for the next 2 weeks it'll be $25, and people, they're already spending $25 a month on medicine, so they've got nothing to lose, really. And so a lot of people would then come and do this, and of the people who would go for these uh, lost leader kind of techniques.
It's just that it doesn't look right from the front because it's
Hi.
illuminated.
Hi,
Doesn't look
Lillian.
right. Yeah, I know. It don't look good. Yeah.
Okay, and so then they would say they would come and try it, and then and it always worked, and then they'd come back and often do a full RTT session or other modality with me. So it was a good way of helping people, but also getting clients to come in. So I went from that. And I found that when I worked with people who were RTTers, it never would work the first time. So I usually have to do it 2 or 3 times. And then I realized that the RTTers weren't fully participating in it because they were trying to pay attention to what I'm doing and think about why I'm doing it and try to learn it a bit or something. Whereas if I got a person who was not a hypnotist, they would just do what I said. So 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and they were done. So then I learned that with people who are RTT, if I did it, it would help. It would save time in the long run if I explained to them fully what was going on and what the theory was and why I was going on with it instead of just doing it. Does that make sense? And so it's a very powerful technique, but it's a very simple kind of technique, and it works. So mostly it's meant for pollen allergies, air allergies, but I've even had people try it for food allergies with the warning, with the warning if you've been using an EpiPen for food allergies, you don't give it up. But if you can reduce the use of it, then a lot of people would try it anyway. I did for one day for a guy with cat allergies, and I went through and then you sort of go through the part of clearing them and getting rid of it, and then we're going to test it. And then he said, "Oh, I've got," yeah. So while he was doing the session with me about not having a cat allergy, he had a cat sitting on his lap. So he picked up the cat and brought it up and says, "Hey, I'm not sneezing." I thought that was a bit extreme, but it worked for that. And so the way it works is you have the person imagine that they're in a room where they often experience problems. Maybe their living room, maybe their kitchen, their bedroom, their deck, whatever. And then they imagine that they're encased by a special glass box. So they're in the room, but then they're surrounded by this box. And inside the box, and you talk them through this, the air is perfectly clear, perfectly wonderful. There's nothing in it. They can breathe, their lungs are clear, their sinuses are clear, everything's being released. And then gradually you introduce a particle of pollen, and then introduce more and more until they're in this box and it's saturated with pollen and they're breathing it all in, but they're not reacting. And so you get them through that kind of process. So I mean, in the nutshell, I mean, that's a synopsis of what's involved, and it works. Except with RTTers because they're listening to me, but saying what I see, what I do. So that's why I make sure, like an ordinary person, I wouldn't explain to them what's going on or why. I would just tell them, "Okay, do this, do this, do that," and then that would work. But and you've probably have noticed that when you're doing even RTT with another RTTer, they have a tendency to pay attention to what you're saying and think about why you're saying it instead of just participating. These stuff. Anyway, so I found even when I do RTT sessions on an RTT colleague, I have to remind them, just participate. Let go of your analytical thinking. Let go of your your thoughts. We can always talk about it afterwards, and then it would usually work better. So are there any questions before I just go ahead and start? Or okay.
I was wondering actually, do you do a full session beforehand with the scenes and everything, or you just go directly into the pool?
Nope. No, this is 45 minutes and it's done.
Okay, so it's just automatically go to the healing pool.
Not even healing pool. This is, oh, if I'm doing RTT, yeah. No,
Yeah.
for this technique, this is where they're going to be in this room and the room is cleared out and then it goes from there.
Okay.
And so if they're doing the healing pool, and I was saying uh, healing pool tends to work a lot better on Canadians because Canadians can think of healing vortex and tornadoes, and there's that kind of fear. And I was telling Shiva at the beginning that when I got into RTT, I'd memorized the healing pool, I memorized the induction, and I would stop. Anybody who'd sit still for me, I would do a session for them. I'd be on the bus and, "Oh, you've got a sore leg, let me help you." All that kind of stuff. And but this this allergy release. It's not hypnosis and it's not like healing pool, but it does use the imagination and it focuses on what their issues are. So I can either work with one person or work with all of you. I was just thinking right now, um, there's probably a lot of smoke where I don't know if there's smoke where everybody lives, but here in London, Ontario, we've had horrible, horrible smoke for about a week. And you'd swear that a house across the street is on fire. Some days it's so bad. And even looking across the street at the house across the road from me, it would be it would be like foggy from just the smoke. And the fires are, hundreds of miles away, but the air has brought them down. So with people having this kind of smoke, this is a technique that might be useful to helping them to release and breathe in, okay? But the real emphasis is, of course, the allergens. We're coming into August. It'll be coming into times like ragweed, various things like that. And since people will have this reaction to the ragweed, this is a really great technique. And and because it's usually, like I say, you can sometimes work in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and you just say, okay, $25, come and try it. And if it doesn't work, we'll do another session, because there's additional ways of doing it. But the one I'm going to talk you through is the easiest, quickest, and the most effective. And then if people come back and it's always an RTTer who would have to come back for a second time or a third time. But it's just a way of releasing it. Okay. So you start off by having the person be in the place where you have the most reaction. So we'll focus, say, on well, ragweed is more common than the smoke, although I think this could work very well for people who have to deal with smoke. Just walking outside to your car, it's so bad some days. So you could imagine them, you're walking out to your car and you go into your car, and then you have them have the perfect air in their car, which they could also do with the air conditioner, so they can relate to that. And to just be able to release. Okay, so you do so like somebody from RTT, I go through this whole explanation. Somebody who's not RTT, I would say to them, what kind of issues do you have? What are the problems you have? When do you have problems with breathing? What's, is it a cat in the house? And I usually try to emphasize that we can just work on one thing at a time, but I've actually had them, they have problems with grass when somebody cuts the grass in their front lawn, and they have a dog, and they all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times you have them do all of it at once, because it's the same thing. The allergy problem should be a reaction with your nose, your sinuses. It should not involve your immune system. And so you want to let the immune system relax and let go. And if they do not, if you can get rid of the immune system reaction, then they don't need to have, the puffer so often. They don't need to have the eye drops and all that kind of stuff so often. And so that's a win right there. And go from there. So you have the person imagine they're in a place where they like to be, but they're having a reaction. And of course, to just get the reaction, it takes like 5 minutes to get a person to say, oh yes, I react when I go outside and the grass is being cut. I react when the goldenrod's in bloom. I react when my sister brings her dog over. I react when I go to my grandmother's house and there's cigarette smoke, or, that kind of thing. So whatever their biggest problem is, that's what they're going to focus on. So say they go over to somebody's house and, the cigarette smoke, you can have them go to that house and imagine this clear box there. Otherwise, I say, you know, you, you're at your home and there's a reaction, you might be out on your deck. Okay, so let's say you're on your deck. I want you to imagine that you're surrounded by a clear glass box. And as this box surrounds you, you're going to be safe. And the air inside this box, you know, it's big enough you're not claustrophobic, you can reach out. And the air is perfect. It's clear. And as you're breathing in this perfect, clear air, you feel your body releasing. You're releasing all tension. You're releasing all issues. Your sinuses are becoming open and soft. Your body is feeling wonderful. You feel healthy. You just feel fantastic. And as you breathe in this perfectly clear, perfect air, all the symptoms are disappearing. All the symptoms are fading away. You're breathing in this perfect clear air. And as you breathe out, anything that's being toxic in your body, anything affecting your nose or your lungs or your throat, it's releasing. Your body is feeling fantastic. You have lots of energy as you breathe in. Everything's wonderful. As you breathe out, you release all problems, all issues. You're going to feel wonderful. So just take a few minutes, just experience the joy of having perfect breath, of breathing in, and your body feels wonderful. You breathe out and you release. And you're surrounded by this perfect oxygenated air. And as you breathe in, every section of your body, every section of your nose, every part of your sinuses, every part of your throat, all the little tiny particles in your lungs are relaxing. You're releasing all inflammation because your body is at peace. You're feeling wonderful. You feel fantastic. You feel the energy as you breathe in this wonderful, perfect air. And just take a few more moments to just enjoy this feeling of being healthy, this feeling of having everything in your body working exactly the way it should work. You feel peace, you feel joy, you feel wonderful. Now just imagine that just one tiny particle of whatever's been causing you problems, one tiny particle of smoke, one tiny particle from the goldenrod, one tiny particle from a cat or a dog or whatever causes your reaction. One particle, when your lungs are clear and perfect and total, one particle will have zero reaction. So just imagine this particle's coming into your body. This particle's coming into your nose and down to your throat, and your body is okay. Your body can get rid of it. Your body's going to have zero reaction and let it go and release it. And again, you breathe in perfectly clear air and your body's perfect. Your nose is clear. Your nose, your sinuses are clear. Your throat's clear. Your lungs clear. Now imagine two particles are coming in and you breathe in these two particles, but your body is having zero reaction because your body is not going to have any more reaction to this particle because your body knows that your immune system does not have to be involved, should not be involved with reacting to these particles. You have special hairs in your nose to capture these particles and then release them and let them go. These particles have zero reaction to your blood, to your sinuses, to your lymphatic system. You're perfect. Now imagine a few more particles are being introduced, enough that you can actually start to be aware that there's particles of smoke, or there's particles of the ragweed, or there's particles from a cat. As you breathe them in, your body is having zero inappropriate reactions. Your sinuses are staying clear because the hairs in your nose are capturing these particles and getting rid of them. There's zero reaction. Your throat's clear, your lungs are clear. And as you release any reaction, your body is feeling so strong, your mind is powerful. So now imagine that as you sit in this beautiful, protective, clear box, is starting to fill up with the pathogen, with the allergy, with the smoke from the fires. It's starting to fill up with smoke from a cigarette. It's starting to fill up with ragweed or cat dander or dog dander. But your body's okay. You're not reacting. You're not letting it touch you in any way that matters. It's just there. And you can let your body be at ease. And even though you're surrounded, the air around you is saturated with this pathogen. These pathogens are being handled in the perfect way. The hairs on your nose filter them out. There is zero immune system reaction because your mind is so powerful. Your mind knows it's inappropriate now or ever to have a physical reaction. Your body knows how to simply filter it out, let it release. So your immune system is so strong and so powerful. Your immune system is in perfect balance. And even though the air around you is saturated, your body has zero reaction. You feel so strong. Your breathing feels so great. You feel so wonderful. Just let it go. And just continue for a few more breaths. You're breathing in this super concentrated, saturated air, and you're having zero reaction. There is no immune system reaction. Your body is so strong now and so powerful. Your body knows exactly how to deal with this. Your eyes are not reacting. Your eyes are clear. Your eyes have perfect amounts of water to keep them clear. There's zero reaction in your throat, zero reaction in your lungs. You feel so strong and so powerful and so at peace, even though you're surrounded by this super saturated pathogen. Your body is responding perfectly. And take another deep breath in and relax. Now imagine this little glass container around you is disappearing. So you're just in the actual room where you might have had a reaction in the past that you don't have a reaction to anymore. You're in your car where you might have had a reaction after walking outside your car. There's zero reaction. You might be outside on the deck. There's zero reaction. You're in the normal environment. You're perfect. And now, no matter how much pathogens, no matter how much pollen, ragweed, dandelion, whatever, cat dander, dogs, your body is so strong and so perfect that you have zero reaction, and you're in the normal environment. You're in the room, you're where you used to react, but you no longer react, or you're in your car, you have no reaction. You're sitting on your deck and you're breathing in the normal, unfiltered air, but your body is responding perfectly. Your nose is filtering it exactly the way it should. So your lungs are clear and open and have zero reaction. Your throat has zero reaction. Your eyes are at peace. Your eyes are soft. Your eyes feel perfectly. And you just breathe in and you breathe out and you feel wonderful. You have such a great immune system that there is no longer going to be any reaction. Your mind knows that it doesn't need to react to any of these things. Your mind knows this is something that your nose can handle. This is something your eyelashes can handle. This is something your skin is powerful and strong and holds back. And you feel great and you feel wonderful. So just take another deep breath in and breathe out. And tell me about how you, and then I'd say to them, you tell me how you feel. And then if it's with the cat, I would say, okay, let's imagine now that you're going to go through it again. So imagine again that you're in this glass cage with clear filtered air. And as it fills up with the particles that used to cause a reaction to you, but have zero reaction to you now, you're surrounded, you breathe in, your sinuses are working perfectly, and you feel wonderful. You have energy. As the glass disappears and you're in your normal reaction, you can pick up a cat and have zero reaction. You can pet the dog and have zero reaction. You can walk through a field of goldenrod, zero reaction. You can sit on your deck and have all the flowers and zero reaction because your body has reset. Your mind has reset and you feel wonderful. You feel great. You feel amazing. And anyway, and that would be basically the session. So as you can see, it takes, I think I spent more time explaining to you what was going to happen than what happened. Um, but within just, 15, 20 minutes of using their mind, their imagination to let their respiratory system and their lungs respond to it, it releases. Anyway, anyway, so it's very quick, very short, very powerful. Does anybody have any comments or?
Hi,
Anyway,
Dorothy. Neha here. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like you directly came into the session. So, how about the induction part? Uh,
okay. Um, it's not hypnosis, it's not an induction. So what, just as a recap, I'd have a person come in and I'd spend not very long, 5 minutes maybe, saying, what sort of allergic reactions do you have that involve breathing? Is it, and I was explaining at the beginning that for a lot of people, spring allergies to, tree pollen, various types of spring flowers, spring pollen, um, they happen at a time, May, June, when you're writing exams and a child is afraid because of the exam, but your mind cannot recognize exams. Exams are a sort of they're not like a real thing, whereas the pollen is. So the mind is saying, okay, this child is afraid. Why is the child afraid? Oh, it must be this tree pollen. Okay, because the child's afraid of the tree pollen, I'm going to attack it and have a full reaction to get rid of it, which is not the way your body's supposed to react to tree pollen. It should affect your sinuses, but it should not affect your immune system. And then a lot of allergies, at least in our hemisphere, are also in September when school's starting, and the mind's saying, okay, school is too something they can't relate to, but ragweed's blooming, other kinds of, of plants are, so then the mind is thinking, well, this must be why the child's afraid, so I'm going to launch an attack to prevent that. And the body overreacts. So anyway, you find out, when does it happen? Does it happen from a cat? And again, the cat could be, maybe as a small child, a cat scratched them, so the child became afraid of a cat. So then just being around a cat, because the reaction has become oversensitized, then the immune system becomes involved. And the immune system should not be involved for a cat or a dog or dust in the house or cigarette smoke. But the body, for whatever reason, has reclassified it. So this is just a very short exercise to sort of let go of this reaction. So that's where having the imagination is so powerful. So imagining being in a glass box with perfect air and breathing it in and letting all the reaction disappear, and then having gradually introducing it and allowing it to have a correct response, not an incorrect response. So that's what the whole exercise was about. And I was also explaining at the beginning that it's harder to do this exercise with RTTers than it is with the general public. And so when I finally like, I do an RTT person and it wouldn't work. I'd do a second one and it often wouldn't work. And usually the third one would work. So I finally realized that RTTers would be trying, as I was going through it, RTTs are trying to analyze what she's saying, what's she doing now, what's going on. Whereas a person who's not an RTT, you tell them, just imagine the air around you is perfect. And they do that. Whereas an RTT
Okay.
person will be more skeptical, like, how can the air be perfect? What? So what I finally learned to do was with an RTT, or I'd explain everything I was going to do before I did it. Whereas with a normal person, a normal client, I would just say, okay, tell me what you react to. What is it, you especially want to clear? And then I'd have them just jump into being into this box, and find out also, where do the reactions happen the most? Is it in their car? Is it at their grandmother's house? Is it outside in the backyard? Is it in their living room? And have them imagine themselves there. And then they have this box around them, and it's clear, so they can see they're not sort of locked into a horrible place. But that the air, there's a restricted area that can have perfect clear air. And then they have a few minutes, they're breathing in this perfect air, so they're letting your mind release all reaction and stuff. And I don't know if you were there when I talked about this guy. He wanted to do with cat allergy. His girlfriend had a cat and he loved his girlfriend, so he was putting up with her cat. And so I did the whole thing about the cat and went through it, and then said, okay, let's go through and do a test. And then he said, oh, I can do it right here. And he had the cat sitting on his lap the whole time I was working with him. And he took the cat up to his nose and said, hey, I'm not sneezing. And I was like, that's a little bit more extreme than but I mean, he was happy. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. And so for an ordinary person, where you don't have to tell them ahead of time what you're doing so that they'll actually do it. A normal person, you know, you tell them to imagine this or imagine that, and they just do it. An RTTer, you say, imagine this, and they'll think, why do I imagine being in a box? So it takes much longer to do the setup. But even so, I mean, it's been less than an hour of talking about it, right? So it's very, very quick, very short, but very effective. And so I was also saying that a lot of times I would put a post on Facebook and say I'd offer it for like $25, and I'd get a bunch of people. And usually half of these people who did it would then come back and then want to do something more involved, often an RTT session. Because of course afterwards I tell them what I also do with people and how I use RTT to help people. And so because they had this experience that they could release their allergy, then they'd be more willing to come and do an RTT session. So I got a lot of clients through just using this very, very quick, very short technique. And like I said, I'd put it on Facebook and say, for the next 2 weeks, it's $25. And so, and because it's so quick, I mean, I could do like, you know, 6, 7, 8 people in a day kind of thing, because it's not very long. It doesn't take a lot out of me. It's not very draining. So that one of the things I did learn when I went to RTT, and I went to London for training. And the second day I was there, this woman who sees auras came up to me and said, Dorothy, your aura's wide open. You have to close it. And I was like, yeah, right. Anyway, so a technique that she taught me, she taught a whole bunch of techniques, but a very, very simple one is if before you have a client, and I had to learn to do this, especially when I was working with somebody with a lot of illnesses. When I'm working with somebody with cancer, I'm very careful to always do this clearing. I worked with a young teenager with MS once, and I forgot to do this protective bit. And her mother called me up the next day and said her daughter's feeling wonderful. And I thought, oh, yeah, and I'm feeling horrible. So one technique you can imagine is imagine you're reaching up to the heavens, and you're reaching up to the heavens, and you're bringing energy down from the sky, from the sun, and you bring it down like a tube coming all around you. So you're surrounded by this protective tube, this barrier, and nothing can get into it. And you're bringing it down past your feet, down to the ground, and you're sending it to the middle of the earth and clicking it into the middle of the earth. And then you're bringing it up so that there's another layer. So there's a vacuum seal in between this other layer. And you bring this other layer up to your head, and then you fan it out all around you. And anything negative that comes from a client comes to this barrier and goes up the tube to heaven, and you're safe. Anything positive can cross this, and you're safe. And so the first few times, I mean, first few years I was doing this, I would very, very carefully imagine everything around it. Now I can sort of reach up to the sky, bring it down, bring it up, you know, so I don't even think so much about what I do, but at the beginning I sort of imagined it. And if you do a Google search of protective energy barriers or something, there's a whole bunch of different techniques, but this is the first one I was ever taught, and I just find it so easy to remember. And since I'm working with people with physical issues, I'm very careful before I, just before, when have Zoom open, I'm waiting for them, and I just go through and do this imagination. And that's really, really important. So my background was that I did a degree in biology, in genetics, years and years and years ago, when genetics were very new. And then I did a degree in library science to be a librarian. And I worked at a research center that was focused on physiology and biology and genetics for 37 years. The federal government. And then when I retired, I have a son with he's got a lot of physical issues. He was born with, um, I had twins who were born when I was 6 months pregnant. And so they're 2 pounds, 10 ounces. They spent a long time in the neonatal intensive care unit, and he had lost a good section of his brain at birth. And I mean, despite that, he went to university, but he did have cerebral palsy, which meant it's cerebral palsy if it happens before you're 18, it's a stroke if it happens after 18. And so one of the effects was his hand. He could use his hand if he looked at it, but if he wasn't looking at it, it wouldn't react. So his hand was often in this claw shape, which is very typical of anyone with cerebral palsy or a stroke.
Kaya ang kaya ko step na
Yeah.
ang daw ang bag na
Yeah. Well, anyway, this woman from Germany, she was on a Facebook group I was on about cerebral palsy, and she said, "I can help you." And because he had, because my son also has epilepsy, she would only work with him if I stayed in the room with him. And so during the session with her, his hand opened up. And usually for his hand to open up, it would be painful physiotherapy. And he was so relaxed, his hand just opened up. And I was in tears to see that. I thought, I'm going to learn how to do this. So then I took the RTT with the intention of working with people with physical issues. And then I found that large numbers of people with chronic physical issues have also had sexual trauma. And so I thought, this is beyond my my skill set. So that was when I went to England and took the RTT course, um, and really wanted to pay attention to the psychological trauma kind of thing. And I learned a lot when I was there in England, and worked. So I did only RTT for about 5 years. And then I started learning these other modalities. So I took the course for multiple sclerosis. And then I took, if you go to these hypnosis seminars, these people are doing various methodologies. So there's a few people I thought, I'm impressed with them. So I went and took these courses. So I went and took this course on allergy release. And then I took a course. There was Gary Coles. He did a master's degree working on hypnosis with breast cancer clients. And what he did, he had he would go in to meet these women the day before their breast cancer surgery and do a hypnosis about pain release, being free, being perfect and healing. And he was able to document with the hospital that the women who had the hypnosis sessions needed less pain medication after their surgery and were released from hospital several days earlier than the women who didn't have the hypnosis. So that was a very powerful thing to prove in a master's thesis. And so I took his course and learned about that. And then I've got a video about what I do with the cancer on YouTube, and I talk about the various things, and that video helps with getting clients, and I'm really excited and thrilled and happy when I help somebody with cancer. I did work with one woman, and I worked with her for about, I don't know, 3-4 months, and she'd had horrible things happen to her in the past, many rapes, all that kind of stuff. And but I prepared each time. I prepared the healing, healing vortex kind of, she was in England, so I did healing vortex, not just healing pool. And then her husband called to say that she had died. And I thought, and she paid full rate the whole time. And I thought, oh, he's going to be angry at all the money she spent on me or something. And he thanked me for helping her. And he said that she would listen to my recording every night, and that she found that if she listened to my recording before her grandchildren came over, she didn't need painkillers. And if she took the painkillers, she would be so groggy she wouldn't be able to talk to her grandchildren. So my recording really helped her a lot. And I mean, it's so powerful. And I was just, I'm going to quit the RTT or yeah, the RTT Facebook group because I'm just not doing enough to make to warrant the money anymore. And so I was describing, I think the absolute strongest client I ever had was a woman who was in about 35 and she wanted to have a baby, but she'd been anorexic and she had not had a period for almost 15 years. And so when she went to the in vitro place, because she's no longer menstruating, basically she was in menopause for 15 years, they couldn't work with her. So I did a session with her just focusing on her ovaries, releasing eggs, her uterus being ready for it. And she had the first period 2 weeks, just 2 weeks after the hypnosis session. She had the first period that she'd had in 15 years. And within a very short time, I think it was 2 months, maybe 3, just before she was going to go back and try the in vitro, she became pregnant naturally. And that was that was the most amazing thing. And I was able to help her because she'd been an athlete. She was preparing for the Olympics and she had a fall and she cracked a vertebrae in her neck. So she was bedridden for quite a while. And then she was upset because she said, I ate so much, I became fat and I don't want to. So she didn't want to be fat. So she stopped eating and became anorexic. And I had had the experience, well, my twins were born by C-section and I was on morphine because I was only 6 months pregnant when they were born. And so it's a much more traumatic surgery than it is when you're 9 months, because by the time you're 9 months, your stomach has been thinned out, but at 6 months, it's still quite thick. And so the morphine really was essential. And then a friend came, some friend, he came to visit and he started laughing at me because he said, your face is like a perfectly round moon. And I was so embarrassed and so hurt and so upset. But and that was one of the things I could ask her, were you on morphine after this neck injury? And she said, yes. And said, didn't anybody tell you that a side effect of morphine is fluid retention, which can cause you to have a moon face? And nobody ever told her that. So once she understood that what she considered to be fat was actually water, and it was a reaction to the medication, and it wouldn't likely happen unless she ever ended up on morphine again for some reason. She had such a release because she had been so afraid that however she ate or whatever she was doing, she might become fat again. And so by releasing that fear and and also doing the imagination of her ovaries being perfect and her ovaries producing the eggs. And then when she got pregnant, we did sessions about, the eggs going to be implanting perfectly. She's going to raise this perfect baby. And just before childbirth, we did a whole couple of sessions about, she was going to have it by C-section because her bones were so fragile, but that she was going to have a perfect reaction. So anyway, that was one of the very, very best clients I ever had. And then I had another client, he was from Toronto, and it was just when COVID started. And I've never really done people in person. I don't have an office. And I think it's better with Zoom because then people are tired after the session, so then they can just go and relax. They don't have to drive home, which I think would be scary. But anyway, he wanted to do it in person. So he came from Toronto and we rented my yoga studio. That was the only place I could think of. And since they weren't teaching yoga because of COVID, it worked out perfect. And he had slipped on the ice a couple of years earlier and he'd fractured his hip and he'd had to have surgery. And then he was always in pain and he wasn't walking right. So he was grinding his knee. So then they were talking about doing a hip replacement or the bone from the leg replacement. And so So he came, and I said, okay, we'll do the full session. And he said, oh, I just need something about memorize, about the pain, the way I'm walking and stuff. I was like, no, you're paying for this session. You've come, we're going to do full. Anyway, he was in his 70s and going back to, what's the scene that's very important, all that kind of stuff. And he started crying. He was remembering his grandmother who died when he was his grandmother had mostly raised him when he was young because his parents were working. And then she died when he was about 15. And he's a guy, so he's never able to cry. So, so at this session we were in, I mean, he was sobbing with the memory of the loss. So I did a recording about allowing his grandmother to be at peace, being released, releasing all that pain. And then I did a really long healing pool session with the energy coming into his body and then his hips. And magical healing crystals were moving onto his bones and onto his joints, and then the stem cells could come and latch onto these magic, because healing crystals are imaginary, so that the stem cells, which are real, could come and latch on to these healing crystals and form it. Anyway, he didn't have to have his hip replacement. And I talked to him like a year afterwards, and he said, if he listened to my recording at night, he did not need painkillers the next day. But if he didn't listen to me, he needed painkillers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And anyway, so when I was more active in RTT, I just met so many wonderful people and just loved being able to help them. I did 3 women to get pregnant who had difficulty getting pregnant, and that's always exciting. I had I think I've done about 40 women for breast cancer, and I guess about 40 people for other kinds of cancer. And one of the interesting things I noticed is that the women with breast cancer, you'd go back to a scene, okay, and tell me how you were feeling. And they would have a scene, they say, I was hurt, I was upset. And then I'd say, well, what about anger? Weren't you angry when this person treated you this way? And every single breast cancer client except one, and I'm not sure I even believed her, but would say, I am not an angry person. They'd say some variation of that. I do not lose my temper. And, you're human, you get angry. So when I could get them to accept that anger was a normal feeling, they're allowed to feel anger, then I think that made a big difference for them. But I thought it was very interesting that basically every breast cancer client said this, I'm not angry. And people with the other kinds of cancer, they'd say the same kind of a scene. And I was angry. They could acknowledge they were angry, but the breast cancer clients didn't. So I thought that was really an interesting observation in what's happened. And it still happens consistently. A breast cancer client will say, I don't feel angry. I don't feel anger. I don't get angry. And it's like, you're telling me something where somebody's hurt you, abandoned you, anger's normal. Anger's okay. So anyway, any other questions? And otherwise, I'll turn off the recording. If anybody wants to just chat about anything, we can
See,
do
you got nice summary pen.
that. Yeah. Okay, I'll turn off the recording. How can I do this? Let's see. It's been so long since I've done this. I'm not even sure if I can do it.